Hello and welcome. My name is Marcos and this is Self-Psychology. First of all, I'd like to thank all of you who went into the website and signed up for the newsletter, for the monthly newsletter, and for the email transcriptions. As I mentioned last week, now we're sending out emails to those people who sign up on the website, and it's free. A transcript of these video podcasts. And again, it's a good thing because you can store these emails and then when you have a similar problem, you may want to bring them out and kind of read them. Or for people who don't have time to view the video, they can definitely take some time and read the email. So it seems to work for a lot of our viewers. So I encourage you to go into the website www.thejovinstitute.org, and on the first page you're going to see a newsletter, and right there is where you will sign up, put your email, and then in the second page it's going to ask you what type of email transcript would you like, whether it's in English, Spanish, Portuguese, Russian, or German. Now, a request for people out there from different languages: if somehow you have some time and you like to volunteer your help, I am hoping to translate the podcast content in different languages, including someone who may speak Portuguese or Russian. I'd really appreciate some help with this so we can get it out there to more people in different languages. Okay, so thank you very much for that. We need to jump right into the podcast, because today we're talking about sexual dysfunction in men, and next week we'll talk about sexual dysfunction in women. Now, I came up with this podcast because I've received several emails on this topic, and also in my practice I've seen a growing amount of men coming in worried about this and trying to work on this disorder. So it seems to be growing for whatever reason, and that's why I felt it was very important to create a podcast about it. That goes to show that when you send an email in, what I normally do, I will always respond to it in the next few days after I receive it, and what I'll do is kind of wait till I receive a few emails around the same theme, and that's when I'll create the podcast for it. So your emails are what's driving this podcast, so I encourage you again to send them in. Also, I encourage you to look at, view, or read the content of each video podcast, because sometimes I talk about topics or areas around the topic that you can benefit from when you're not actually interested in the topic. For example, now we're talking about men sexual dysfunction, but I'm going to begin with a history of temperament. So these are things that anyone can benefit from knowing. So just because the topic or the theme doesn't seem to resonate with you, you may want to take a look at it anyway, because there are other things in the video that you can learn from. So welcome. Today I want to start with how scientists believe personalities are created. The first thing that usually happens is we're born with temperament. Now, temperament could be seen as how sensitive you may be, how sensitive a baby may be, or how easily bothered a baby may be. So for example, I'm sure you've seen some babies that are pretty relaxed. They're not easily bothered, where others are very angry and are easily bothered. So we could actually say that one baby has a different temperament than the other. Now, of course, these babies are newborns, so they didn't learn this from the environment or from being raised. This is something they're born with. The second part of the personality is what we learn. It's our environment. It's our parents. It's our teachers. It's our friends. It's our experiences. So basically, in early age, between those two things, we create our personality. Now this is important in what we're going to discuss today, because I like to talk about this topic as a cultural thing. We all belong to a particular culture. Some are race cultures, religious cultures, regional cultures, but we are all at least part of a family culture. And in our family culture, we tend to pick up what is it that a boy or a man is supposed to be like. So let's assume we have two babies that are born with different temperaments, right? And they're born into this one family that thinks of a boy should be playing rough, should be playing sports, should be out with his dad fishing or working on the car, different things like that. And let's say one of the boys has a temperament that goes with that kind of merges with that kind of culture. So that boy is raised the way the family culture prefers it to be. But then a boy could be born into a culture, into the same culture, but have a more relaxed type of sensitive temperament. And this boy then grows up in the same family, but then is taught that being sensitive, crying, wanting to do other things besides playing rough with the other kids or playing sports, as a bad thing. They look at it as a weak kid. And that's the information that kid takes in. And unfortunately, that forms part of that kid's personality. Now, what forms part of it is kind of an inadequate type of personality. So when the kid grows up, he kind of tends to feel like he's different. He's not like the other boys that are play rough, play sports and that kind of thing. And it makes him feel inadequate. This can cause depression because a lot of kids tend to put themselves down for being different. It also causes problems between relationships, and I'll talk about that next. So a young man is growing, and he may tend to hold off on the relationship thing because he may feel inadequate. Eventually he goes into a relationship, and when he goes into this relationship, the sensitivity that he feels, he tends to be a very nice guy, a loving guy, an affectionate kind of a person. He expresses his emotions to his girlfriend. Now this could be a good thing, or it could be a not so good thing. If the woman was raised in a culture where men are supposed to be rough and non-sensitive and non-emotional, then she may not appreciate a man like this, and they may not be a good match. However, there are women who appreciate men to be more on the sensitive side, loving, caring, responsible, and different traits like that. So the problem comes in, as I've seen in my experience, is when you match a sensitive man with a woman who believes that the man should not be sensitive. What I've seen in these kind of relationships is that the man doesn't fulfill the needs of the woman in whatever area that she wants him to fill her needs. And often enough, she becomes distant. She is not as sensitive as he is. she may cheat on him, and she may leave him. These are just generalizations that I've seen may happen. And this is simply because there's a mismatch in an emotional expression kind of temperament. Now, how does this kind of propagate? How does this kind of move forward for this man as he gets into sexual experiences? Well, unfortunately, someone who is sensitive, someone who's been reinforced that they are weak, inadequate, non-manly, and sensitive, tend to have some sort of anxiety around sexual intercourse, which is obvious because of their feelings of inadequacy, and they tell themselves how small they are, how bad they are, how worthless they are, and how different they are, how weird they are. And when the young person usually waits to a later age to even begin being sexual with women, when the man finally does this, then the anxiety that the man produces often gets in the way of actually having the sex. Now, I want to emphasize that this is not the only reason that men have sexual dysfunction. Okay, there are many other reasons. Today I'm focusing on how some emotional men who have been raised feeling inadequate, how that expresses itself, manifests itself in the bedroom. Now, I define sexual dysfunction as not being able to get an erection, having a soft erection, or persistent premature ejaculation. Now, when this happens, when the sensitive male goes into the sexual relationship with the woman or with the man, then they start to think, they start to ruminate about how they may perform in bed. Now, unfortunately, this is exactly what gets in the way of actually performing, because their anxiety is so high at the point when they're actually expressing themselves sexually that it gets in the way of actually performing. The thoughts of being inadequate, the thoughts, the worries of performing well is what gets in the way of actually having enjoyable sex and not having sexual dysfunction. So when we talk about treating this, it's like any other anxiety that we are looking for the thoughts that fear something in the future that's going to happen, that something really bad in the future is going to happen, and when it actually does happen, you're not going to be able to cope with it. So that's how we work on that. So let's go with an example. Okay, so let me think of a man's name, Tom. Okay, Tom is one of these men with a more sensitive temperament who is raised being reinforced that he is inadequate, and he's been in and out of depression. He waited till later age, 27, to experience sex for the first time, and he's been having trouble ever since. Now, Tom, when he goes through the ABCs, he admits that the A, the activating event, is either when he's actually in the experience with his girlfriend about to have sex, or when he's thinking of having to have sex with his girlfriend. Either one brings up these beliefs, these irrational beliefs. And with Tom, the irrational beliefs are am I going to be able to perform? And it's, I may not be able to perform, and if I don't perform, it's going to be awful. So basically we have worries about performing and it being awful if he's not able to perform. The C, the consequence, is high anxiety. He becomes very anxious. And the behavior attached to the consequence is that he either withdraws from having sex, and that's why he waited till later age, or he has sexual dysfunction. He is unable to get an erection, he is unable to get a hard erection, he has a soft erection, and also he may have premature ejaculation because of this anxiety. Now when Tom disputes his irrational beliefs, what he does is he wants to tell himself that sure, it's possible that he may not be able to perform, but in fact it will not be awful. It will not be the end of the world if he's not able to perform. If he's able to convince himself and believe it, that it won't be the end of the world, then that anxiety will lower itself so much that he may be able to actually have enjoyable sex. Because that's the idea here, to reduce the anxiety so much that the person is able to enjoy sex. Now, how does he do that? Well, again, he has to dispute the awfulizing very strongly. And I encourage Tom to talk to his girlfriend about it. To talk to his girlfriend about this issue he's having and how he's thinking it will be awful. And so that she can support him, she can help him see that it will not be awful, that it would not be the end of the world, and it would be okay. And once he believes that, again, he'd be able to function so much better, because the anxiety will reduce itself to a manageable level. Another way he can reduce his anxiety is by just having a romantic evening with his girlfriend, making the romanticism, the time with her, as the good experience, let's say, as the great experience, not necessarily the sex part. So if he's able to have a really nice romantic evening with his girlfriend, and the sex is the secondary part, then he doesn't have to make himself anxious about that second part. Because what would be great for Tom to do is to actually not think while he's having sex or preparing to have sex, so that his thoughts would not get in the way. Now, he needs to find a rational alternative. Something, a coping statement, something that could be fresh in his mind, where he can have it next to his bed, or different areas where he can practice it, so when he finds himself in these situations, he can tell himself whatever that coping statement may be. Now, it could be something as simple as, it is not awful if I'm not able to perform. It would be totally alright. It is not the end of the world if I'm not able to perform today. Just something that will reduce his anxiety to a level where he will be able to perform. Because again, the anxiety is what's getting in Tom's way. Now, there's a couple of things that Tom could do to support this. He can, first of all, talk to his partner about these issues he's having, so she can reinforce the fact that it would not be horrible, it would not be awful, it would not be the end of the world. By her supporting him on this, reassuring him, again, he's able to dispute those irrational beliefs. Secondly, Tom may want to do something different, like enjoy a romantic evening with his partner prior to sex. This really great, sensitive, romantic evening that is the climax of their time together, not necessarily the sex. The sex could be secondary. That way, again, it'll take the pressure off of the actual sexual part of the evening. And once the pressure is off and he's able to not awfulize it, then he will be able to perform. These are some self-help tips for Tom to be able to dispute his irrational beliefs and be able to perform when he's having trouble. However, if his anxiety is too high to be able to do this, then I definitely recommend that he get some help, just like I always do. One more thing. There's a myth out there where older men have sexual dysfunction because their testosterone levels are low. Well, that's a myth. Studies have shown that a 60-year-old has the same amount of testosterone as a 20-year-old. In their 40s is when men's testosterone levels peak. So that excuse isn't accurate. So what is? What causes sexual dysfunction in older men? Well, it's actually heart disease. And this is important for young people to know also. When people have heart disease, they have atherosclerosis and they have plaque in their arteries. There's an enzyme that's produced by the arteries that actually help the sexual organs do what they're supposed to do. And when they're damaged by plaque, then they're not there. And that's what generally causes sexual dysfunction in older men. Now, this is important for young people to know because they need to take care of themselves when they're young. They need to eat right, eat healthy, and protect their heart and watch their blood pressure so that they can protect their arteries so that they will not have sexual dysfunction as older adults. Also, depression is another reason that people are unable to perform. The difference with depression is that it's usually a low desire to have sex. So it's not a performance thing per se, but it affects the relationships just as much as sexual dysfunction. So it's very important to understand that part too. Okay? Well, I'm glad you joined me. I'll be here next week, and I hope you will too. Live healthy and live happy. I'll see you here next week.